It's easy to recall Angela Lansbury on stage, a commanding presence, that clear soprano voice filling the theater in musicals like Mame or Sweeney Todd. Or perhaps you remember her guiding viewers through weekly murders in the cozy fictional town of Cabot Cove as Jessica Fletcher. But the essence of Angela Lansbury lay in the personal realm, beyond the stage lights, in the spaces she retreated to when the cameras stopped rolling. Her father passed away when she was 9, and in so many interviews she spoke about how that loss shaped a sense of rootlessness, as if her life became a continuous search for permanence. Even as her career soared, Angela carried a longing for stability and safety, qualities she sought to create in every residence she chose. Each home, in its own way, was her response to a childhood shadowed by uncertainty. In her early days, when Angela first arrived in New York with her mother, the fledgling actress scrounged for roles and formed her earliest impressions of what a real home might look like. She spent long hours in cramped Manhattan apartments, sometimes subletting or living with friends. She often recalled a story about the faint smell of fresh paint in a cheap sublet near West 50th Street. The paint was meant to brighten dingy walls, yet it clashed with the landlord's leftover furniture. Even then, with hardly any money, Angela rummaged through vintage shops to add personal touches. A floral tablecloth here, a crystal lamp there, flickers of glamour in an otherwise makeshift living arrangement. She found these details important. They were minor acts of self-assertion in a city that rarely paused for anyone. It wasn't purely the pursuit of comfort that drove these modest design attempts, but a deeper sense of identity. She'd grown up with her mother, Moyna McGill, an Irish actress who carried her own theatrical flair and a certain old-world sophistication. Angela absorbed that sense of style, slightly aristocratic, yet never overly ostentatious. Even as a starving artist in Manhattan, Angela Lansbury sought to carve out a safe haven reflecting her theatrical lineage, her love for elegant lines, and her innate desire for warmth and coziness. By the 1950s, Angela's film career in Hollywood was blossoming. She had supporting roles that earned her critical acclaim, and she found herself increasingly drawn to the West Coast. There was an unspoken rule in Hollywood. If you were serious about a film career, you lived in or near Los Angeles. Yet Angela always felt a tug of conflict. Broadway had embraced her fully, but Hollywood was there for the taking. Could she maintain her theatrical roots in New York while forging a new identity in California? Out of necessity and ambition, she embarked on her first foray into true property ownership on the West Coast. That was a small, mid-century style house nestled in the Hollywood Hills. It was modest by industry standards, especially during an era when big stars purchased sprawling estates in Beverly Hills or Bel Air. Angela's home was perched on a hillside, offering a sweeping view of the city below. The interior boasted clean lines, simple, functional design that felt like a blank canvas. Always one to marry function with emotion, she filled the rooms with warm colors, muted yellows, soft peaches, gentle creams. Instead of huge chandeliers, she preferred floor lamps that created little pockets of light in reading corners or near the upright piano where she practiced. Friends who visited recalled that upon entering, they'd step onto polished wooden floors, scattered with plush rugs like stepping stones of comfort. She kept a surprising number of books on shelves that extended from the living room into the narrow hallway. It was not the typical Hollywood abode, no gold-plated faucets or elaborate poolside pavilions, but there was an intimacy about it. You could almost see Angela's blossoming theatrical persona in the arrangement of furniture, chairs facing each other in cozy conversation corners. You could also sense her practicality. She needed a space conducive to memorizing lines, to hosting small gatherings, to recharging after punishing rehearsal schedules. In those early days, her vantage point in the Hollywood Hills gave Angela a sense of possibility. At night, if she stood by the panoramic window, she could see the sparkle of city lights, a reflection of dreams. She sometimes joked, "It looks like the sea, only these waves never crash," a poetic nod to her longing for calmer shores. And yet she had no intention of losing herself in that mesmerizing glow. While some stars got lost in the swirl of LA nightlife, Angela's home in the hills became a refuge where she could shut the door on Hollywood and slip into a world governed by her own gentle rhythms. But if you really want to understand Angela Lansbury's attitude toward home and hearth, you have to look at how heartbreak and family crises led her to uproot everything for the sake of her children. By the late 1960s, Angela and her husband Peter Shaw were coping with the reality that their kids were being exposed to the dangerous temptations that came with living under the Hollywood spotlight. Her daughter Deidre fell in with questionable company, and her son Anthony was battling personal struggles. Angela famously decided enough was enough. She abruptly listed their Los Angeles property and, in a move that shocked many, whisked her family off to Ireland. While some might have seen the decision as impulsive, Angela later explained it felt like returning to a place where her own roots ran deep. She was born in London, her mother was Irish, and she had always felt a kinship with the British Isles. This time, however, it wasn't a question of a short break. She and Peter purchased a house in County Cork, Ireland, one that had the vibe of a hidden retreat at the end of a narrow country road. Surrounded by rolling hills, dotted with sheep and ancient stone walls, this property was the opposite of the Hollywood Hills home in both style and atmosphere. Here the main house was a centuries-old structure with thick stone walls that kept the interiors cool in summer and damp in winter. It had been partially modernized, but retained its original character: leaded windows with deep sills, wooden beams overhead that creaked in the wind, and floors of uneven flagstone in the older sections. The previous owner, a distant relative of an Irish noble family, had used it sporadically as a hunting lodge, and while the place needed significant renovation to make it comfortable year-round, Angela fell in love with its potential at first sight. It was here, on the outskirts of Cork, that Angela found the serenity she sought for her family. Each day, she rose early to the smell of peat fires and the sound of misty rain tapping at window panes. She'd wander the corridors in a robe, checking the fireplaces in each room, making sure her children were safe and warm. Literal guardianship of the hearth. That sense of maternal protection was at the core of Angela's personality. It was perhaps the very reason she embodied countless nurturing roles on stage and screen with such authenticity. On the property itself, she commissioned local artisans to restore the woodwork and chimneys. She didn't crave grand new additions or ostentatious modern architecture. She wanted to preserve history, to embrace the spirit of the old building as though adopting it into her family. The living room became the emotional center of the house, with a large hearth and a worn leather armchair that Angela claimed as her reading throne. She placed a small antique table nearby, always with a stack of books, mysteries, thrillers, English classics, and occasionally a comedic play. She liked to mark up scripts here, occasionally reading passages aloud. At times, her gentle voice would echo in the rafters, blending with the crackle of burning peat. While the family was in Ireland, her daughter regained stability, and her son found new direction. He would later become a successful director. Angela credited much of their recovery to that home's nurturing environment. During that same period, Angela famously returned to Broadway in triumphant style, flying back and forth from Ireland to New York for rehearsals and performances. Yet even as she stepped into the most glamorous theaters in Manhattan, her heart found quiet in that stone cottage, and so she always hurried back whenever she could. She found a balance between the neon glow of Broadway marquees and the hushed, star-filled Irish skies. That sense of duality, public performer, private guardian, colored her every real estate choice from that point onward. By the late 1970s, Angela discovered that splitting her time between Ireland, Broadway, and occasional film projects was logistically challenging. She needed an American base that felt like a home, not just a place to park her suitcase. At first, she toyed with the idea of returning to California, but her priorities had shifted. She desired a more settled space, one that could bridge her older children's lives, her beloved Ireland, and the theatrical epicenter in New York. The solution revealed itself in a property located in Brentwood, an upscale yet relatively subdued neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was known for its leafy streets and a certain down-to-earth quality, especially compared to Beverly Hills or Bel Air. She found a charming two-story house with a classic Cape Cod feel, a nod perhaps unconsciously to the aesthetic fans would later associate with her iconic role as Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote. White clapboard siding, a dark slate roof, and a meticulously manicured front lawn gave the home a genteel East Coast aura right in the heart of Southern California. A wide porch stretched across the facade, complete with comfortable rocking chairs and hanging flower baskets. Even the real estate agent joked, "This place looks like something out of a New England postcard." For Angela, it was perfect, a subtle bridging of her transatlantic life. Inside, the main foyer opened onto a spacious living area with hardwood floors and a fireplace framed by custom millwork. Sunlight poured in through large windows, illuminating the comfortable sofas and the built-in bookshelves Angela had installed along two walls. Once again, her trademark warmth was evident in every detail. She sourced vintage lamps for soft lighting, arranged plush throws in pastel colors, and adorned the mantel with family photographs and personal mementos from her stage career, like a small prop from Mame or a script excerpt from Sweeney Todd, signed by castmates. She always preferred personal touches over showy displays of trophies. In her mind, a house should reflect its owner's memories and quirks, rather than serve as a museum of achievements. Word got around in the neighborhood that a famous actress lived there, but neighbors were often uncertain which actress. Angela Lansbury was not the sort to flaunt her celebrity. She grocery shopped locally, chatted with residents at the corner cafe, and waved politely from behind her rose bushes. She kept her presence low-key. The Brentwood house became her West Coast anchor for the next several decades. It was there that she developed a fascination with gardening, a pastime she had dabbled in back in Ireland. She planted roses, hydrangeas, and even a small herb garden. Occasionally, she'd invite friends over, and after dinner, they'd stroll through the backyard paths she painstakingly designed. She might pause to point out a newly sprouted seedling or an especially fragrant bloom. These unassuming domestic rituals grounded her, giving respite from the swirl of Hollywood. By the mid-1980s, of course, Angela was catapulted into an entirely new realm of superstardom through her portrayal on the television series Murder, She Wrote. The show's fictional coastal village, Cabot Cove, with its quaint houses, flower-adorned porches, and homey kitchens, formed an endearing part of its charm and mirrored aspects of Angela's personal aesthetic. Over time, fans began to conflate Angela with her homespun character. In fact, there was a rumor that the show sometimes used her personal residences for filming exteriors. That wasn't true, but the rumor stuck because the style of her Brentwood home felt so reminiscent of the cozy exteriors viewers saw on TV. Angela admitted with a gleam in her eye that she took little bits of her own decorating flair to set designers, suggesting small touches that would reflect Jessica's personality: crocheted throws, vintage teapots, classic upholstery patterns. Meanwhile, it was during Murder, She Wrote's run that Angela quietly acquired another property, this time in New York City. Though she was primarily stationed in Los Angeles for filming, the pull of the Broadway stage never dulled. She wanted a residence in Manhattan that would allow her to seamlessly transition into new theatrical ventures. The apartment she chose was on the Upper East Side, in a historic building with pre-war architecture. It was far from lavish, but it had two essential qualities: proximity to the theater district and a nostalgic elegance reminiscent of old New York. The building featured a discreet lobby, far from the paparazzi-laden entrances of more modern high-rises, and a vintage elevator with brass detailing. Angela's apartment itself had high ceilings, crown molding, and large sash windows that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. She updated the kitchen and added some contemporary flourishes to the bathrooms, but the rest she kept intentionally classic: parquet floors, buffed to a soft sheen, walls painted in gentle neutrals, heavy drapery in the living room that gave an air of refined repose. Her decor approach was distinctly more metropolitan here: sleek bookshelves, a scattering of modern art prints, a baby grand piano in the corner, reflecting her more formal cosmopolitan side. Yet even in this polished urban setting, Angela inserted vestiges of cozy domesticity. Friends recall that she always had a tea kettle on, an old habit from her British upbringing. She chose plush seating around a coffee table that often overflowed with newspapers, playbills, and half-finished crossword puzzles. It was not unusual to find a knit blanket tossed over an armchair, reminiscent of her other homes. She once confided to a friend, "I never want a place that feels too perfect or distant. I want rooms that people can settle into with a cup of tea in hand." That attitude typified Angela's perspective on interior design. No matter how grand or minimal the space, it needed an undercurrent of warmth. As the 1990s approached, Angela reached a certain pinnacle of success. Murder, She Wrote was a cultural phenomenon, earning her legions of fans, including a younger generation who discovered the show through reruns. She began to channel her success into philanthropic endeavors. There were rumors of her interest in purchasing a large estate in the Hamptons for lavish parties, but if she ever considered it, she quickly dismissed the idea. Glitz and glamour had never been her style. Instead, she put energy into her existing residences, especially her beloved Brentwood house, which she expanded slightly, adding a sunroom filled with potted orchids. She also updated the kitchen so she could host more family gatherings, particularly holiday dinners. That kitchen became something of a central hub, an airy space with a large island and bar stools, where her grandchildren could chatter away while Angela whipped up an English trifle or a hearty soup. She delighted in the everyday rituals of family life, relishing the sensation of belonging that came from the bustling energy of loved ones in her home. The color scheme was warm and earthy: light wood cabinetry, gleaming copper pots displayed on hooks, and wide windows that let in sunlight during the morning hours. Visitors joked that it was so inviting, they felt like they'd stepped onto a set for a cooking show. Angela, who never took herself too seriously, would respond with a laugh, "I already do enough pretending on camera. This is just real life, darlings." By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Angela Lansbury began to step back from the relentless schedule of weekly television. She occasionally filmed TV movies, returned for special stage performances, and took well-deserved personal time. During these years, she found herself increasingly drawn back to the Irish property, now much improved from its once drafty condition. She had upgraded the insulation, replaced some of the old windows, and turned the garden into a vast tapestry of color, a glorious riot of perennials and shrubs that thrived in the moist Irish climate. She cherished walking the countryside, hearing the hush of the wind over the fields, feeling far from the hustle and bustle of show business. Still, she never abandoned her Brentwood house. It remained her principal American residence. But the Irish home took on a deeper significance as she aged. In interviews, she often spoke of Ireland as her spiritual center. She described opening the door to that centuries-old house and feeling she was stepping back in time, reconnecting with her mother and grandmother, with the old European culture that had shaped her youth. The floors might still creak, and the fireplace might still smoke if the wind blew the wrong way, but that was all part of the charm. It was a place of both memory and future promise, a legacy she intended to pass on to her children. Curiously, during the final decades of her life, Angela's two most frequent residences, the genteel Brentwood Haven and the historic Irish Cottage, seemed like polar opposites. One was sunny, manicured, and quintessentially Californian, while the other was moody, steeped in Celtic history, and sometimes cloaked in mist. But these two homes mirrored the duality in Angela's personality, the disciplined, bright optimism of a professional performer and the reflective, almost melancholic soul who relished solitude and familial closeness. When fans asked her which she preferred, she'd simply say, "They each feed different parts of me." It's fascinating to note that in all her homes, Angela retained an unshakable tradition of reading scripts and stories late at night in the living room. Sometimes it was by the gentle glow of a standing lamp in her Manhattan apartment, other times by candlelight when the electricity flickered during storms in Cork, or in Brentwood with the air conditioning humming softly while the rest of Los Angeles slept. It's almost as if the magic of storytelling, of stepping into other people's lives, was inextricably tied to her sense of comfort and belonging. Over the years, rumors circulated about secret rooms in her Irish property, perhaps hidden passages from centuries ago. And indeed, there was an old corridor in the basement that had been sealed off, presumably used for food storage or to keep valuables safe during turbulent times. Angela never bothered to fully explore it, preferring to preserve the mystery. "Some things are more intriguing, left untouched," she once mused, a statement that applied as much to her personal life as to her property's hidden corners. Then there was talk of a private vault in her Brentwood residence containing letters from her mother and father, carefully preserved. Friends who visited rarely saw them, but from time to time Angela would hint at rereading those letters to remind herself of her lineage and the journey that brought her to where she was. What becomes clear is that for Angela Lansbury, a home wasn't just a place to rest her head. It was a chosen family member, an ecosystem of memory and aspiration. Those properties bore witness to her joys and sorrows, her growth as an artist, wife, and mother, and her final sense of belonging in a demanding world. Looking back on her decades-long career, you realize she never insisted on a showplace house that screamed wealth. Instead, she curated places that whispered of history, personal comfort, and meaningful connection. Each marked a different chapter in her life. Each illuminated a new facet of her character. She grew from a determined young actress forging her way in cramped New York apartments to a global star who chose to retreat from the neon glare in favor of quiet nights by the hearth. Through it all, her home spoke volumes about her desire for serenity, her connection to her heritage, and her unwavering commitment to nurturing the people she loved. Angela Lansbury's legacy extends beyond her stage triumphs and her iconic portrayal. It lives in the gentle spaces she curated for herself and her family, the wisdom she left in the design choices that balance comfort with class, and the intangible feeling that a true home is not about extravagance but about belonging. If you were to stand today in her Brentwood kitchen, sunlight flooding in, or wander along the drafty corridors of her County Cork retreat, you might feel a peculiar hush. It's the quiet understanding that here dwelled an extraordinary spirit, someone who spent a lifetime making others believe in fiction, only to find her deepest truth in the sanctity of home. Perhaps that's the ultimate realization. While Angela Lansbury's performances graced the grandest stages and reached millions of television sets, her real triumph lay in crafting havens that reflected her warmth, her resilience, and her profound empathy. Even now, if you listen closely, you might hear the gentle closing of a well-loved script, the soft hush of a turned page, or the faint echo of her voice lingering in the rafters. Reminders that the true measure of a star is found not just in marquee lights, but in the enduring glow of a home well lived in. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.